there was a report in Politico EU that Telegram is quote unquote avidly used by lawmakers, cabinet members, and presidential advisors in France, including Emmanuel Macron himself. And then the founder of Signal was riffing on that news. So here's Matthew Rosenfeld, founder of Signal, who goes by the name Moxie Marlinspike on Twitter, all part of the pageantry with this particular story. He writes, Telegram messages aren't end-to-end encrypted. It is also a cloud messenger, meaning that all messages live on Telegram's servers rather than the user's device. With one query, the Russian Telegram team can get every message the French president has ever sent or received to his contacts, every message those contacts have ever sent or received to their contacts, every message those contacts' contacts have ever sent or received, etc. It's just plain text. There are no limits to what they can do, like use an LLM to help go through all that material and pull out the dirt, map the relationships, figure out who's keeping secrets from who, etc. For the French politicians and cabinet members, it is kind of too late to do anything. Even if they try to delete all their messages now, the Telegram team can just mark the messages as deleted so that they no longer display to the user, but not actually delete the data they retain access to. This could get really wild. So that's a consequence of a lack of end-to-end encryption. Is that right?
Yeah, and this is how, to be clear, this is how the vast majority of the internet works. Like encryption is the exception, not the rule. So there is encryption generally now for almost everything in terms of communication. So you go back and this, like, go to your browser, right? It used to be most websites were HTTP:// name of website. And that was basically defining the protocol, the hypertext protocol that you would communicate. And and if you go right click on a web page and see view source, you can actually see what is sort of sent back and forth. What the server is doing, it's sending you all that text, and then your browser interprets that text to display the content. And that was originally all just sent as plain text. It was sent as literally like letters and numbers coming over the wire. I mean, ultimately ones and zeros, but you sort of get my point. And the obvious problem there is anyone could read it, right? It's going over the wire. Anyone with access to the wire, you could be on an HTTP connection in a coffee shop and someone could just like grab it and look at it and see what you're viewing. So for a long time now, today, the vast majority of web pages, including Stratechery, including, sharptech.fm or whatever, are now encrypted. But they're encrypted in transit. What that means is when the server does it, it locks them with a key, and then it sends it to your browser, and the browser unlocks it and then sort of displays it. Now, this key is really interesting. You have to have a key sort of somewhere. The key is between the browser makers and sort of the ultimate consortiums that do this sort of thing. And there's lots of services to get this working on your website. Like Let's Encrypt is like a free one that I use, that almost most any sort of consumerish, smaller scale sort of folks use, that ties into this. But it is encryption in transit. What it means basically is people can't jump in the middle and sort of see what you're doing. But once it gets to your browser, it's decrypted. And critically, on the server, it's decrypted, which it has to be. They have to actually sort of create the content. The difference between that and end-to-end encryption is, yes, it has to be decrypted on my device, but when I send a message to a group chat on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp, like I said, uses the server, it sends it to the WhatsApp server. The WhatsApp server distributes that message to everyone in the group chat, but at every moment between my device and the device of everyone in the group chat, it is continuously encrypted. And it's encrypted using my key on my device. And that key is stored on the device. And Apple's talked about the secure enclave. That's for storing keys. The idea is it's supposed to be really hard to sort of break into and get access to them. And WhatsApp cannot, even though the message is on their server, it's there as gibberish. It's encrypted. They can't actually look at it and see it. Now, Apple is super big on encryption. They've been working to make like iPhoto end-to-end encrypted. Like for a long time, you would have iPhoto Cloud or whatever it's called, iPhotos in the cloud, and it would go up to their server and then it would be decrypted. and then it would be, when it's sent to you, it would be re-encrypted and then show up on your device. End-to-end encryption is the idea of, even in the cloud, it's continuously not encrypted. And you think about it, this imposes real limitations on the user experience. So, for example, it's hard, you might not be able to look at stuff in the browser if it's end-to-end encrypted, because how do you actually, if your key's on your device, how do you get that up into the browser so it can be rendered so you can see it? You can't. It has to go to sort of like to another safe device that has a key that is included in it to sort of decrypt it. You can't do things like Google Images, for example, or Google Photos does all this incredible sort of machine learning over your photos. And you can find, that random photo because it did facial recognition and sort of whatever it might be, or find some sort of text or whatever. But that's all happening with Google's servers in the cloud, and can only happen if those images are unencrypted. That's right. And so one of the reasons why Apple can push in this direction for sort of photos to be end-to-end encrypted is because they do all the image stuff, but they all do it on device. That's why when you get a new computer or a new phone, it's all bogged down for the first few days because iPhoto is redoing all the analysis. And then this gets into a lot of the like analysis about, is Apple at a fundamental disadvantage for like machine learning and things like those lines, because they're not doing it in the cloud. They're not doing these sorts of things. So there's real fundamental trade-offs, but that it's why a lot of Apple's privacy claims, which we gripe about in the context of when it's applied to ads, and it feels a little self-serving. But I always come back and say there's real legitimacy to their claims. And this is an example. Like, if you're doing everything on device, it's fundamentally more private and it's not accessible. So to extend the photos analogy, and then we'll sort of bring this around to Telegram, one of the sort of, there's an issue of child pornography sort of just in general. So it's called CSAM, child sexually something exploited material, or I can't remember exactly what the acronym is, but a child sexual abuse material. That's what it is. So the law around this is, if you encounter it, you have to report it. And there's an entire sort of infrastructure set up to do this sort of reporting. And that's basically the law. Now, what is not the law, but is sort of become I'm more familiar with U.S. laws, to be clear, than sort of Europe, and this is obviously going to be pertinent to this discussion, is there is definitely a expectation that if you're able to scan for CSAM, you should be scanning for CSAM. And so you have a situation where, and this actually turns into one of the things that I think is really unfair, but you take like Facebook, for example. Facebook communications, by and large, are not encrypted on the server. Again, WhatsApp is an exception, and then Messenger, you can turn on encryption, but there's been a huge debate about Facebook Messenger turning on encryption by default. And the reason is that Facebook scans for CSAM. And you might think that, wow, that's a good thing. And then when they find the CSAM, because there's like a database of it. So the idea is like there's a known, this filth, there's like a known entity that gives like all the hashes for this content. And so the idea is, you can take a photo, you can reduce it to a bunch of letters and numbers. And every time you reduce a photo to letters and numbers, it should match. And if you have two that are the same, it's called a collision. And there's lots of complexities that go into this. But there's a centralized sort of agency. I think it's technically a nonprofit, but it sort of works under the auspices of the federal government, that publishes this list of sort of hash numbers of known CSAM material. Okay. And then what a Facebook will do is, every image that's sent unencrypted or posted on Facebook or whatever it might be, is reduced to a hash. Those hashes are compared. If they find a match, it's reported to this agency. And the idea is, all this should be able to be done and reviewed without any humans in the loop, for pretty obvious reasons, right? Like you don't even want to be like, it's, and
you don't want to subject contractors or employees.
Yeah, and only this one sort of centralized sort of entity is supposed to be like the clearinghouse for these sort of issues. So again, you might think Facebook's doing a good thing, right? One of the most perverse things that has happened over the last few years as Facebook became a sort of like villain is that Facebook was criticized for being this massive repository of CSAM.
Yep.
The problem is that like they point to all these numbers. Facebook reported X number of cases of CSAM on their servers.
Because they're identifying it, then they become a target.
That's right. The reason they have those numbers is because they're scanning all this sort of stuff. Guess who doesn't scan? Apple. Right? It's like, wow, Apple doesn't have anything. Yeah, because they don't actively scan for this sort of stuff. And this was the case even before it was like end-to-end encryption sort of photos. Like they just didn't do it. And it's a sort of like I said, if you find it, you're compelled to report it, but you're not compelled to scan for it. But there is over time been an expectation that companies do scan for it. Mm-hmm. And so all this is context for sort of the Telegram situation, which is they have the capability of scanning for all this sort of material because it's unencrypted. So all this stuff is on their servers. They don't do that. They don't scan for it. Is that a crime? Like that's kind of what's at play here. And this is sort of, that's point number one. Mm-hmm. Point number two is this bit about if the FBI shows up to Apple and there's a lot of talk about can they break into an iPhone? And Apple says, no, like you can't break into an iPhone. We're not going to help you do it. It's encrypted. We couldn't do it if we wanted to. You're asking us to engineer a hole in the operating system, blah, 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 in our devices. And so the FBI, by and large, has ways around it using these third-party companies that have figured out how to break in at a very sort of deep level at tremendous sort of cost and price. But what they can do and what they do is if there's a warrant for a particular user, they will deliver them all the content in iCloud, for example, that is by and large not encrypted or traditionally has not been encrypted. And that is also sort of a legal requirement. If you're served with a warrant, you have to give up the data that is sort of on that warrant. Mm-hmm. That's part two of the Telegram story. They also don't do that. They don't sort of respond to sort of warrants for specific information, specific individuals. The way they frame it is, look, our keys are in different countries. The content's spread all over the world. If you want this, you have to get a warrant from every entity in the world that is, where this stuff's stored. And that will only happen. And so if you do that, sure, we'll deliver it. But no one's ever done it. So what a surprise. And so this is the actual context of what's, at least what's named in the warrant, is two things. Number one, they're not delivering stuff that they're being demanded to deliver from a warrant. Mm-hmm. And number two, and sort of most problematically in multiple respects, is they're not actively looking for bad stuff. And that is that when they talk about a failure to moderate, that's what's being talked about. Sorry, that was a long-winded sort of overview, but I think there's a lot of context around this that is
yeah, no, we got a good deep dive into encryption. And as far as why Telegram is so controversial, I think that bit at the end there articulates it well, is they're not participating in moderation that has basically become the baseline expectation all over the world. They're also refusing to cooperate with authorities. So it's not all that surprising that they became a target in France. Why Pavel Durov went to France knowing that he was a target in France is an open question. It's part of what makes all this so mysterious. But like in the first 24 hours after this news broke, there were a bunch of folks online who were loudly worried about what this means for free speech on platforms all over the world. How do you think about those implications and what the arrest does or does not signify in that respect?
They're very real. They're legitimate concerns and complaints, right? Like if you want to go back to sort of the analog world, is sort of Ma Bell, AT&T, responsible for crimes that are committed utilizing the phone network? Mm-hmm. Like, is it their responsibility to sort of listen in on everything?
Criminally liable as a co-conspirator.
That's right. And so this is where I do think the second charge is a little more understandable, which is, and this to go back to the analog example, if AT&T got a warrant for a wiretap, they had to put it on the line. And I think that, to the extent, if you want to be on the sort of the side of the authorities in this case and to hold Telegram liable, this is the point where, look, we've sort of agreed civilizationally across the West that if you get a warrant, you have to produce it. And they're not doing that. And so that is sort of point number one. It's the second point, though, that is in many respects more interesting and more complicated. Like, and this is, CSAM is like this nuclear bomb that goes into all these discussions. Because who on earth could be opposed to capturing this filth and stopping it and sort of whatever it might be? And this is a huge thing. And should Messenger be encrypted by default? But at the same time, like, do we actually want, there's a certain paradigm that's crossed where even if AT&T wanted to listen to everything, they couldn't, because that was not scalable to a gazillion humans listening in on every line. And you have like visions of like this, the East German Stasi or sort of whatever it might be. Computers can do it. Computers can actually monitor everything. And do we want that to happen? And do we want it to be a crime for not doing that? Right. And then it's a hard discussion, because the folks that say it should happen immediately go straight to CSAM. And it's like, do I want to be on the position on the side of, I'm not defending this. It's like, well, you sure are. It's like, no, that's like, it's one of the all-time, maybe the ultimate sort of example of a really painful trade-off that is sort of the reality of sort of computers and the internet. If you do you want to, knowing you have the capability to reach in and stop really horrible stuff, do you want to leverage that capability, given the implication is basically a company listening in on everything that you do?
Right.